president and founder of LabTech International. We are the oldest and largest producer, designer of technical education equipment in Asia, actually. And we've been in Indonesia for almost 30 years as our home base in Batam Island. And we deliver a series of speeches at different venues around the world. Last 2 months ago, I was in Africa, in Johannesburg. We were talking about issues in Africa, what's happening there. This is actually part of what we call Reorienting TVET to the 21st Century. It's a series of talks we've been doing over the past 5 years or so. Each one is addressing a different aspect of technical and vocational education, of how we bring it into the 21st century, how is it changing, because this area has been a little bit slow to change in certain parts of the world, and particularly the topic that we're going to talk about today. If any of you were at the opening keynote, this topic was referred to by several of the presenters, one from the Philippines, the Director General of Technical Education Skills Development Authority in the Philippines, was talking about how jobs are changing and how they're going to change for this. Also, Ananto, the expert staff to the Minister of Education and Culture here, was referring to that students, 65% of the students entering into primary school today will be working when they graduate. They'll have a job that doesn't exist today. So how do schools cope with that? What do you do? How do you train for jobs, that don't exist today? And what are the dynamics about there? So first we'll just talk a little bit about what LabTech does and what we do. And our company was founded by educators from around the world. I'm from the US originally. And we formed an international company that was aimed at developing training systems for industrializing countries like Indonesia, like Malaysia, like the Philippines, like Kenya, even at that time Saudi Arabia and UAE. So we designed systems for various countries around the world. That makes us rather unique in terms of what we do. And here you can see several of our booths that are here at the guest exhibition. But over the years, and we've been around almost 30 years, we have our training systems in all the blue countries on this map. So 75 countries around the world that we work in. It's a lot. And I've been privileged to travel to many of those countries. Also, our staff do too. And we observe and we look at what's happening in education around the world. And we also believe that it should be done differently in different countries. And so the program that we may do in Indonesia here is not the same as the program that we do in Kenya, for example, or Tanzania. What we do in Saudi Arabia is not the same as we do in Egypt. What we do in South Africa is not the same that we do in Colombia or Mexico. So they have different variations. There's a lot of commonality, but it's the variations that are also important, because it's not universal. It used to be the concept of education, one size fits all, particularly in technical vocational education. We train an automotive mechanic is the same anywhere in the world. Well, it's not. There are variations. For example, Saudi Arabia has a lot of American vehicles from General Motors. Here in Indonesia, we have zero. So what you're working on and what the student will be graduating after he graduates and what he repairs in the shop is completely different. The technologies are different, the skills similar, but the actual application is different. And so those differences should appear in education. There's a lot of companies in the world that still don't believe that's true. They still believe one size fits all, and that's a problem. And so it's something that we've challenged from the beginning. We also have a belief that we make technology visible. And the latest manifestation of this, if you see our virtual technical TVET booth at the beginning of this exhibition, see some of the 3D, the virtual reality stuff. This is really we teach through the eyes, and that's our principle. Because we teach in so many countries with different languages and different cultures, the main medium of instruction is the eyes for us. It's not reading, it's not even listening, it's seeing. It's basically what is now known today as the YouTube culture. When your sons and daughters or colleagues or young people want to know how to do something, what do? They go to YouTube and Google it, and then say, oh, there's the video, I'll watch that. They won't read the manual on how to change something in Word. They'll watch the video on how to change something in Word. You know, and that's the way young people learn today. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's the natural way we've always learned as a human being. That's how we learned before we could read as a species. You know, we learn by observing, and it is our most fundamental nature that transcends language, and I think it communicates across the world. So this is a very important concept that we have. And we also had the idea that training should combine both practical and theory, that we should be able to develop applied skills, but those applied skills are based upon a fundamental understanding of the theory. So we combine those two elements. Also, all the training that we do is employable oriented, so employable skills. So we teach and we train so that somebody, when they graduate, they can have a job, they can earn an income. You heard, if you were at the opening today, you heard several of the speakers talk about the mismatch between education and industry. What they're talking about is that the graduates can't get work, and there's high unemployment in the graduates because what they were taught does not match what industry needs. And that's a problem. If children are going to spend 12 to more years of their lives sitting in the classroom and they can't get work, whose fault is that? It's not theirs, they put in the time. It's our fault as educators. We did not give them the right tools and did not teach them the right things. So we have to stop that mismatch. So one way to simply put it is we need to teach employable skills, whatever that means. You know, that those are the skills that industry needs, either practical, applied, knowledge, or 21st century skills. We also have a modular system concept that everything we do is by topic, by module, so we can adjust to any curriculum around the world. LabTech is kind of special in a way that we have 8 ISO certifications. And why is that important is particularly one. We're ISO certified for education, research, and development. And we're only one of maybe 3 companies in the entire world that has that certification. There's one in Germany, as you would expect. There's one in the US. And the third one, amazingly, is in Indonesia. You know, and that's us. We have a very strong R&D department because of that. So these are the types of things that we do. Automotive, transportation technology, air conditioning, refrigeration. We're number 1 in the world in this area. For Asian automotive technology, we're also considered by many to be number 1 in the world. Electronics, electrical systems, IT systems, green technology, renewable energy. These are core competencies that you might call in technical vocational education that many, many schools have. And they're very important ones for employable skills. And we have this philosophy at LabTech that we have 3 pillars of our R&D work in a simplified form. It's what we add on, we look at overall objectives, we identify what we're going to be doing, and then we collaborate both with industry and educational teachers and institutions to develop applications or equipment that matches the requirements of the students today. And this is a very good concept to do this. Now, about this background, so what that has to do with the topic of today, since we have the responsibility of creating these educational training systems for employable skills to match the needs of industries, it's always been a pet or a topic of inquiry, my curiosity of what does the future of jobs look like? What's going to happen in the future? Because we have a responsibility to develop the training systems of the future. If we don't do it, who will do it? So it is our responsibility. So what does that look like? So we need to look at these types of things. So what are the factors that are affecting the way that education and development is happening in the world over the next 20 years? Certainly part of the backdrop is going to be the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. That's a big factor. We already went through 15 years of the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals were concentrated on basic education, literacy, achieving literacy throughout the world, and to a large extent, within that 15-year period, the literacy was reduced by 80%, you know. So we have a huge increase in that. And then the Sustainable Development Goals started in late 2015. They're the next group of this. And what are they focused on? Quality of life and also economic achievement to the most part. Because once you provide basic education to people, now you want them to work. Now it becomes important. I just heard, we're discussing with Pak Ananto from the Ministry of Education and Culture, a dear friend of mine, and he's saying this is the time of TVET. Now, this is the time of teaching skills for employment and vocational at this time. This is what we focus on. A decade ago, it was basic K-12 literacy rates, basic education. Now it's further that. Let's give them the skills for this. So this is a big factor. A lot of the international agencies and a lot of the national goals of planning countries are geared towards this. And particularly education fits into 4 of the 17 goals here that we have. Education is part of all of them, but in particularly it's part of 4. The 4th one is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality in education and promote lifelong learning opportunities. This is important for adapting to changing job markets, lifelong learning. But it's also an issue that almost none of the schools fundamentally address in any way. The teachers themselves don't practice lifelong learning for the most part. They stop after they start teaching. It seems like you start teaching, you stop learning. I don't know what this is, but a lot of teachers feel that way. I am an expert, I know my subject, I don't need to know anything more. I will teach what I know, and that's it. Today that doesn't work. It was okay 30 years ago.
Do you find that across countries, or do you find that across countries, you have mostly Asian, or?
Oh, it's global. It's. I think even in the U.S. I get that, less so, but certainly in developing countries, they feel they've earned the degree, therefore that's it, and that is very, very common. But you do find also always, even from the beginning many years ago, you still find the curious teacher. They were attracted to education because they love learning. Those type of people are very special, but the majority of the teachers do that. We have some of our friends from Malaysia here. Many of the teachers in Malaysia are drawn to teaching not because they love teaching, but it's a safe, secure job. Those type of people stop learning, Equitable education is important. And if you talk about comparative things, and that was a great question because I like comparative questions. In Southeast Asia, we're much more progressive on equitable education, including women in schools. We have one of our friends here from the Philippines. Even in technical education, you now find some technical schools, most of the students are women. Over 50%, right, Joe? And in Africa, that doesn't happen. You're lucky you go in technical school if you see one, if you're lucky, But in the Philippines, you can go see 60% in some of the schools, 70% are women, So Southeast Asia is comparatively much more proactive in technical, in all forms of education, including technical education. Deepak, how about India? Not so many women in technical education, right? No. So, goal 5. This is what we're talking about, gender equality. It is important. When you try to develop a country and you are only engaging half of the population, it's hard. You got 100% of the people, but you're trying to develop the whole country with only 50% of the people. It makes your job twice as hard. In Saudi Arabia, I would say, you're trying to develop the country with only a quarter of the people, because half of the men don't work. So it really is hard. But then, if you got the money, you can buy that, and don't have the money. Those become failed states, basically. So it is a real problem, participation in education, and not just among gender, but also men too. And sustainable, inclusive economic growth, the key to that is education, and reduce inequality within and among countries. Again, the key to that is education. So this is part of the backdrop for this. The other thing that we've been seeing as part of this development is just the rapid pace of technology. We've all seen, if any of you, those of you that have grown up in Southeast Asia, those that you are new to here or seen it, the pace of development over the past 40, 50 years is astonishing. It's unprecedented. It's never happened in history. And the models for coping with this have been developed in this area too. What used to take centuries has happened in decades, or even in just a few years. You know, the development that kicked off in the 1980s, arguably, or late 70s in Southeast Asia, and then China did it. And they did it in half as much time as Southeast Asia did it, you know. So these models are very powerful, and if implemented well, they could really speed up education. And it can be summed up in this chart. This chart, we start down at the year 1000, and this is economic GDP index. And it just, for centuries, it just didn't move, you know. And then about 100, 150 years ago, it starts to tick up. And the last 30, 40 years, it just goes off the chart. You know, this is our economic history, development history of our world. What's happened in this period has never happened before, you know. And what we're going to talk about a little bit later on today, assuming I don't know how much time we have, is it's even getting steeper. This is just the beginning. This isn't even the main course yet, I think, of what's going to come in the next 30, 40 years. So, but to deal with that, we've got these models that we call stages now. This is the Singapore model. It started out labor intensive. The second phase was capital intensive, which is in the 80s and 90s, knowledge intensive in the 2000s. This they developed from Korea, which developed it from Taiwan, from Japan rather, and then Malaysia has developed a 5-step program, which Indonesia also follows in this stage. So we got 5 steps on the road to being a high-income, knowledge-driven economy. Why this is important is that at each stage, the education system needs to change. What we teach down here and what the schools look like down here is quite different from the middle. This is semi-skilled or unskilled labor. This is skilled labor, and this is high knowledge-driven, skilled, highly skilled people. So the level of skills, the depth of skills, the subjects change at each way. And this has been relatively slow to, in some ministries of education, to acknowledge. But once you understand this, it actually makes it quite easy to adapt and to change your path of development. The Ministry of Education in Indonesia understands that. I think most of the nations in Southeast Asia do too as well now. And at each of these points, like I was saying, there are different levels of what will happen in the different phases. You know, what you create at different times is important. Now, the mapping that we've done here over the last 3 decades or so is very valuable and useful for what will happen in the future. And, you know, we have a shift generally from semi-skilled to skilled to knowledge workers, transition from supply-driven systems to demand-driven systems, increase in labor market regulations, increase in digital education technology, TVET systems strengthen, and we strengthen the base by implementing STEM also as well. Another factor that's affecting us a lot is population growth. And this is often ignored by people in economic development in some ways or parts of it. The astonishing thing for me, I mean, lately the news has always been dominated by China and India. China and India, they're the 2 biggest countries in the world, and their cases and their history are quite different in how they handle this. But recently, we've been working more into Africa, and for us, the surprise that's going to hit us in the next 20 years is not them. By 2030, India will be a little bit bigger than China, but they'll still be the same. They're on similar trajectories. But the meteoric trajectory is Africa. This is fertility rate. So the dark countries have high fertility rates of about 6 or 7. Now that's huge. You know, a fertility rate of about 2 or 2.1 is neutral. So, like Indonesia's like 2.3, 2.4. Malaysia's maybe 2.4, 2.5. Philippines somewhere around the same. This is 6 or 7. So, by 2050, Africa will have 2.5 billion people. 1 out of 7 people over the next 30 years will be born in Africa. This is where the population increase is coming. And that means we're going to have a lot of young people who need to be trained. This is going to be a problem for the world. If it's an opportunity, and if it's not taken care of, it's going to be a problem. As one of friend said this morning, it could be not a demographic bonus, but a demographic disaster. Now, a lot of countries are looking at their demographic bonuses. So when you look at your population, there's a sweet spot of about 20 years where you have a high rate of youth. And if you train those youth and you put them to work, your economy will be like on turbocharge. You can ride like a wave of economic development if you harness those people correctly. And by looking at these various factors of your elderly, your children, your working age population. This is your working age population. See, it peaks up here at this point. And at that peak, that will be your demographic period, your window of opportunity. It's about 20 years, as you can see here, 2010 to 2035, 25 years. And then it'll start to decline. These waves happen in society for various reasons. The first one that was documented, that's talked about a lot, is my generation out of the US, that was called baby boomers. We were born because people came back from World War II, everyone got married, and they had a lot of kids. And we had a wave like that, and my generation was that way. This is a different reason, though. This is a reason caused by development. This reason is that in the past, people had traditionally large families in developing countries. Why? Because there was a high mortality rate. A lot of kids died and very young. And so you needed a lot of children because maybe only half of them would live. So you don't have 2 children, you have 10 children, you know. And that was the norm. Now, as long as you have high mortality rate, your population growth will still be rather low. But then healthcare comes in. The mortality rate drops. Every kid, each one of those 10 survive. None of them die. And now you have this boost of children up there, and you have this wave, and then by the time they become adults, they figure this out, and they're only having 2 children, you know. So then it starts to drop back down again, and that takes about a generation, about 25 years or so, for that realization, for society to readjust to a new long-term circumstance. Society is slow to adjust, so it takes a generation. So you have this one-time wave because of dropping mortality rate of children, and also education is increasing. Educated parents tend to have fewer children. So this is a unique set of circumstances here. Indonesia is going through this, India is going through this, everywhere in Southeast Asia is going through this. So the educators are looking at this. We have to do something and train these people to work. So the challenge is that whether this will be met or not, whether this will be taken advantage or not, whether this will be a demographic bonus and will be turbocharge the economy, or whether it's going to be a disaster, we're going to miss the boat. Because if you don't train these people, you have a lot of uneducated people flowing through your society for the next 50 years, and that becomes a burden on society then. So it depends on the educators. You can see a little bit the correlations of these waves throughout different regions. I think this is a very interesting chart. And we'll look at this. So this is Europe. So, and this is global age of working populations, North America, you know, there. And so this is working age this was my wave, where I came in as a young adult in the 1970s, my baby boomers. And we actually had another little blip too as well. And so we see Asia here. Asia's a little bit later. So this happened in Europe and the US. This is still post-World War II phenomena. This is now development phenomena in the rest of the world on here. So we also have Oceania, but that's a very small part of the world. But the other one, the red one, this is Africa. So this is the delayed tsunami of a population that's going to hit the world. So they're just now starting to talk about this, and they can learn from Asia what Asia's doing to either catch this wave or not. So it's interesting to see the delayed reactions, these development patterns and questions move throughout regions of the world as you go around. Another chart that will show you this is population. This is Asia, of course, we're the most populated region, and we are going to peak, and then it's going to drop. And this is Africa. So by the end of the century, Africa will have as many people as all of Asia combined. It's amazing. Who would ever think that, you know? What does that mean? So maybe in the last half of the century, even now, the future's in Africa. The growth is going to happen there. Economic opportunity. Even my errant president, Donald Trump. I don't know if you caught this recently. The UN, there was meetings in the UN last week, and he was addressing African leaders, and he talked about Nambia. You know, he was welcoming various leaders. There's a country in Africa called Namibia, and he said Nambia. Nambia is doing really well on its health care. You know, and they will have that demographic dividend. Good health care means reduced child mortality rate. They're going to have that demographic dividend potential there. So anyway, Nambia, Namibia. But the other thing he said, and it's very crass, it's like our President Trump, he said, all my friends are going to Africa to get rich, you know. You know, he's very insensitive, but that's a telling comment. That's true. Africa is a land of opportunity for business now because the population is growing so quickly, economic is growing, will be growing faster than most places in the world. So now is the time of Asia, but later is going to be time of Africa. Okay, but the other thing that's coming in that I really spend a lot of time thinking about, and it scares me sometimes, is how technology is going to drive us to the next age of development globally. And usually, I mean, this is really looking far in the future. Most people are not thinking about this too much, but, you know, it's really kind of interesting to think about how it's going to impact society. And this is driven by, actually, this is a logarithmic chart, so it actually goes straight up like this of the rate of technology of how it's developed. This has fueled a lot of changes in industry, in medicine. It hasn't changed education that much. You know, we haven't had increased productivity. We haven't had cost lowering in education. But in other fields, it's changed so much. And it's being driven by two things. And this is the next chart. This is the cost of technology is falling rapidly, and this is the power of technology. You know, and it's those two cross factors. I mean, you know, when we think about it, and what we carry around in our pockets, you know, when I was going to college, I needed a whole university wing to have as much power as, in fact, it still didn't even have this much power as this handphone does. And it's just amazing what we carry around in our pocket and take for granted. So this falling of the cost of the technology, the rising of the power, is producing changes in many parts of industry. But where are we? If we looked at time across here, where are we at this chart? Are we here? Are we over here? So much has happened. A lot of people think we're somewhere over here right now. I think we may be about there. I think that we're just getting started. And this, when we reach this point, and it goes up like that, the whole world's going to change. And it's not just the high-income countries. It's not just the Western countries. It is also going to affect the developing world too, in much quicker than we expect it will happen. And these are the driving factors. Some people were talking about Industry 4.0. What I just described was the period of 5.0, you know, which we can barely even imagine right now at this time. Artificial intelligence and neural networks that are being developed right now in the world are going to change the way that advice and dispense is happening. And artificial intelligence is here. It's in our pocket. It's on my phone. It's called Siri. You know, actually my wife is sitting over there. She's Siri. She's my original Siri. You know, we've been married for 30 years, and I had her a long time before I had my iPhone. I still ask her my questions. Robotics, nanotechnology, biotech, and genetics. So how this is going to change with automation, this is going to lower labor in a lot of industries, the labor factor. How does this affect, you say, well, how does that affect Indonesia? Well, why did all this foreign direct investment come to the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore? It came because in search of lower labor costs. Why? Because when you do production, you have several factors that report material cost and labor cost. Labor cost in a lot of things was the higher element. So you seek a place with lower labor. That's why you'll move the factory from your country, one country, to another country like Indonesia. But once this automation once we go into Industry 4.0, labor is no longer the major factor. So why should, when you need less labor and you need higher skilled labor, why will you move it from Germany to Indonesia? That labor will not be the main consideration. So we will see foreign direct investment, the shifting of manufacturing that's happened to China, that's happened to Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, will drop off dramatically. The new factors for that will be material. Maybe you want to locate your factory close to your source of material, or maybe you want to locate your factory next to your major markets to reduce your shipping. So there'll be those types of factors that will be different. Or maybe you need to locate your factory where you have skilled manpower to support the higher level technology that is required to do Industry 4.0. So labor costs won't help you there, lower labor costs. You need better, more efficient labor. You might need better taxation laws. You might need a different way to attract business to your country. But what I'm saying in the next 20 years, we'll see major shifts of industry away from developing countries and probably to higher income countries, will happen. So we need to be prepared. Indonesia and countries like this need to be prepared for this. Artificial intelligence. Right now, there's already programs that even I saw one that's being launched in Africa. That's an app on your phone, and it's the first level care provider for medical. So AI is very good at doing set diagnostic works. So you ask a series of questions, you get a series of responses, you get a series of prognoses on here. And then a lot of this type of stuff, or legal advice, or financial advice, can be taken over by AI, and this can be delivered generally, over the internet. Robotics and automation, drones, this type of thing. Let's just take one example. The place where this is going to hit that combines with kind of the first three is self-driving vehicles. Self-driving vehicles is an automated vehicle. It needs GPS, it needs the automation, it needs the robotics, it needs an AI. But they're functional right now. So in the next 10 years, they feel that in the US that 3 million drivers will lose their jobs. Taxi drivers and truck drivers. Particularly the truck drivers will be the first probably because it's very predictable, the locations and things like this. And this is going to change the way that transport is done in the future. You think Uber is or Grab Taxi is an app for taxi drivers, right? No, it's an app for self-driving vehicles. And that's where they're going. That's the beginning part is just the drivers are temporary. The app and the companies, why is Uber worth several tens of billions of dollars? It's not because of the taxi drivers, it's because they're setting up to dominate self-driving vehicles, and they'll have a fleet of self-driving vehicles. This is where their target is. Their target is not at taxi drivers. So this is where they're preparing. This is their launching stage for self-driving vehicles. So if they can control the app and the use, they will control the self-driving vehicle market. And that's why they're worth tens of billions of dollars, on here. And that's why the taxi drivers are revolting. Uber was just canceled in London. Their license was revoked in London because I think the taxi drivers see what's coming on. So what is going to be replaced? This is a very interesting chart. You have examples of occupations here. So you have sewing machine operators. We have a lot of those in Indonesia. Graders and sorters of agricultural products. So these types of jobs are between 100 to 92%, 90% or more subject to automation. So those jobs can be replaced now with today's technology, not tomorrow's technology, today's technology. Stock clerks, travel agents, watch repairers, you're ranging between 60 to 80% of those jobs can be eliminated in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Gone. So don't study to be a travel agent. You're not going to be in work in the next 10 years. Chemical technicians. I think nursing is probably less so, web developers. Now, if you get to irregular jobs or things that are non-routine, they will be less likely to be automated. It's the routine things that happen. Fashion designers, creativity. So creativity comes in, non-routine, the lower you go on this chart. So with this, we can start to ask ourselves, what do we need to train for? Where are the jobs going to be? We don't need to make new courses for sewing machine operators. We did this. I did this. I set up labs, many labs to train tailors and sewing machine people. It's not going to be necessary. It's going to be computerized. So go up, your body will be scanned, all your measurements, you pick out what you want, and zoom, the material will be cut, sewed up, delivered out of a box, So, this will happen. So 30 to 50% of the current jobs are replaced over the next 15 years. This is very, very soon. So our curriculum needs to change. We need to think of what we're going to do. So if 50% of our curriculum disappears, what is it we're going to change? We need to start thinking about this now. Young people will face perhaps 3 to 5 career changes in their working life. Before, when I grew up, when I was young, you would go and work with one company for your whole life. But now that just doesn't happen. Workforce, rise of the service industry, decline in people engaged in agriculture and manufacturing generally will be a trend. And however, education and professional services will remain as a human element. So, how do we evolve? So what I'm talking about, if we look in broad strokes, originally these are general mega trends in society, from an agricultural society to a manufacturing information society to network services, knowledge economy. Really what I'm talking about is the fourth one. It's not even on the chart yet. People are just talking about it, but it is the next change, and it'll be the fourth revolution, I think, for us. And you can see in past trends what's happened in the US. This is actually agriculture. No, this is manufacturing. As you can see, manufacturing has remained stable for since 1940. The amount of people we've had in manufacturing has remained stable. But the amount of productivity of goods and services delivered out of manufacturing has increased exponentially. The rise that we had was in the service industry. The problem that we've had in this era, the automation has been replacing the skilled jobs. They've not been replacing necessarily the low-level jobs. We've had a hollowing out in America of our middle class, actually. And those people the economists did not take this into consideration in terms of education. They figured that they would go to the next available economic opportunity. But where was that? There was, and it mostly was in the service industry. And the service industry is lower paying. It's like the fast food guy, the lower, almost semi-skilled jobs. And so they had a good manufacturing job, and now they're working at a lesser wage, and they're not happy about that. And this is why Donald Trump got elected, because he tapped into that anger, into the disaffected middle class. We've had huge communities that have lost their production base of factories moving overseas to countries like Indonesia, and they're angry, and it decimated entire communities. And these people are fed up, they don't understand it. And they're blue-collar workers, they're manufacturing people, and they're not attracted to the knowledge economy. You're not going to be a computer programmer without assistance. And so no assistance is given to them, and we have communities in the US that have high unemployment areas scattered throughout, and those are the Donald Trump's 30% people that backed him. So this explains that if you don't take care of this, you can have a social revolution on your hands too, as well. This is another version of that, where you look at agriculture, the number of people engaged in agriculture. There's so few people in the Western countries, but yet the food production has never been higher. And the same for manufacturing. Again, the number of people is there, and then the rest of the economy going up on here, like this. So this is an interesting one, where what type of work can be automated. So you can divide it up into these areas. You have managers, not subject to automation so much, expertise, interface between different things, unpredictable physical jobs. These are less likely to be automated. Those that collect data, process data, or predictable physical activity, if you look at those factors then and they fall within that category, it's very likely to be automated. And you think, well, this is going to happen in Europe or the US, why should we worry about it? Well, this is the eye-opener chart for me. The countries with the darkest colors are the ones that will be the highest percentage of replacement and automation. So look at the color in North America. It's light. It's not going to affect North America. I just told you 3 million truck drivers are going to lose their job here in the next 10 years. This is one of the least affected countries. Look what Indonesia's country is. It is in the area of 49 to 51% of the jobs will be significantly affected by automation. Japan is the worst. It's black. And Siri, my dear, Thailand is also black too. There's going to be a high level of automation there as well. Why, I don't know. I bet it's just how they do this, but it's interesting. The gray areas there's no data for, so we don't know about Africa. Africa's just a big question mark, you know, for what's going to happen there. But this is astonishing. This is why it's going to happen here first, not last. You know, when I first started thinking about this, I thought, well, like everything else, it'll take time to get to where we are. But no, it's not. It's coming here first. It's those industries are going to automate here, and then they're going to move out. You know, because why? This is where labor-intensive industry is. Labor-intensive industry is no longer there. It's already changed, but they're here, and so those jobs that exist today are going to disappear rather quickly. So it really gives us something to think about there. When is that going to happen? Well, this chart explains that, and we have different scenarios. This is the rapid projection, and this is the long-term projection. But it's starting now, and it's going to continue for the next 20, 30, 40 years that this is going to happen. This is within your children's lifetime, and my children's lifetime. And so this is their concern, and we ought to educate them about this. Now, coming back to Uber and stuff like this is particularly for adoption of operating vehicles and material moving equipment in the U.S. for self-driving vehicles. It's happening, they predict by 2020, it will start, and by 2030, it's complete. Within the space of 10 years, the transformation of the industry will happen. That's so quick. You know, we're not talking about 30, 40, 50 years. It's starting now, and by almost 2025, it's going to be complete within the next decade. You know, so this is the United States, earliest and latest, and this is China. China's not much different from Indonesia. China is 2025 onwards. You know, that's still very, very soon. This is for self-driving vehicles. That's how soon it's going to be here. I don't know if it's true or not. These reports come from the data that's available. I did not put this together. This is generally, this particular chart came from a recent McKinsey report. But if it's to be believed, it's certainly food for thought. It might impact us on there. So we need to reinvent education and TVET. And I think we're coming up to our time. How much more time do we have? Any more time, or we're out of time? It's up to me? Until dinner, yeah? I'll just do a couple more slides. Okay. It's the point of, let's think about this. What's going to happen here? So we really covered that there's going to be shifting economies. We're going to see manufacturing relocate. We're going to see jobs relocate around the world. We're going to see shifting production, shifting jobs, increasing automation, and also urbanization is a very important factor in there. So, you know, I don't have a master plan how this is going to work. But there are certain elements that we might refocus on. You know, human care aspects are probably going to be around for a long time. An example is nursing. That probably is not going to be automated that soon, although Japan is trying to develop a robot to take care of the elderly, you know, because they don't have enough people there. They employ Filipinos or Indonesians to do that, you know. Teaching is also one, but one of my friends from the Ministry of Education said, well, if the teachers don't change, we may have to replace them with robots or AI. Psychiatry, because a robot to understand or AI to understand a human, I think that's going to take some time. before that happens. Complex maintenance issues. Maintaining this technology, it's going to be a while before it's able to maintain itself. Also instructing hybrid work systems. AI is likely to introduce itself in the workplace together with the human element. So humans will need to work with AI and use it just like another tool. So we need to teach that in schools. How does that happen? We need to break the barrier of using AI in the schools for this. The creative arts. Indonesia has a lot of this. So I think the design element, although you could, with the 3D printers and stuff like that, you could be making the topeng mask and everything like that too. It won't be as nice as the carved one, but you can do it. So we need to make a better plan for this, and I think just by talking about these elements, and it's just starting. In fact, the keynote speeches I heard this morning is the first time that I really heard this come up by other keynote speakers, and this is my first outing to talk about these things. It's something I've been reading and thinking about for a few years now, and I think it's time to put this out in the dialogue with people and to raise this up so that we can get a better plan. Because if we don't make the plan, our children are going to be in trouble. So I'll leave you with that thought then. So thank you very much for joining me today here for this. And I hope that it's been a little fun and interesting for you anyway. So thank you so much.